Hi, my name's Eben and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Codebots. One of the most frequent questions I get asked is how long will a legacy migration take? Over the last 2 weeks, I've been working with Matthias, with Afri and Bogie and the KMS team, including David, to work out how long it would take to migrate from the legacy system across to a new cloud-based system. To answer that question, what we do is we go through a process from the way of working, and we're looking to build up 4 things. The first one is a backlog of requirements. The second is a prototype, hopefully a click-through or a tech spike. The third thing is your entity diagram, and the fourth being your software estimations. Once you've got the first 3, you can work on your software estimations. We had Afri and Bogie look at the software estimations using traditional software, and they came up with 69 weeks. And that's very typical of software projects. What we also did is we looked at what was the common functionality across all of that. We looked at how to lean into the Codebots behaviors, the cool things the bots can do. And what we were able to do was reduce the estimation down from 69 weeks down to 18. You can imagine how happy David was when he heard that number.
All right, so that brought it down from 140 weeks to 69 weeks, which is a significant improvement.
It's good.
So yeah, and then the Codebots estimations came to 18 weeks-ish, including the trim down the text spikes.
Wow, that's
Wow, that's significant.
significant reduction. David will be happy to see the Codebot estimation, but we will hate with Mimi and Bogie because too much.
Yeah, we do the estimation based on current reality, Afri. So
Over the next few minutes in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step you through what the process is we went through. We're going to look at the key risks and some recommendations. We're going to look at the estimations themselves, both from a traditional and a Codebots point of view. We're going to look at the planned next steps and how we're going to implement those. And my favourite bit is we recorded all of the video meetings, and we're going to look at some of the Q&As we had over the course of the process. But first, to get ourselves oriented, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look into the library and some of the articles and knowledge that we created throughout the process. One of the key problems with software and technical debt is the lack of knowledge or the loss of knowledge in the actual legacy system itself. So what's super important as you go through the process and you're documenting, you're creating, you're doing all these things around the legacy system, you want to tuck away as much knowledge as you can into the library. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you through some of the articles of the 14 articles that we created and put into the library for KMS.
Sorry, one last thing I just wanted to show you. In the back end of the academy, under qualifications over here, Tess has done a lot of hard work to do this way of working qualification. It'll probably take about an hour, it's a bunch of reading, and it's quite easy. You just follow the bouncing ball, but you'll get more of an idea what we're talking about. If you guys can finish that off, that'd be pretty awesome.
So by putting all the information into the knowledge base, into the library, we're starting to consolidate and regain our momentum in the project itself. To answer the question on how long a legacy migration project will take, we ended up with 5 key risks and recommendations. The first one was around the size of the legacy database, 663 tables. The second one was around the user experience and the navigation of the system itself. The third one is around training the team up and making sure that the team taking over the project are across the technologies that are going to be used. The fourth one is to make sure we align to some sales objectives. Okay? Too many times I've seen projects fail because we don't have sales objectives that we're trying to meet. This is especially important in using agile software. And the last recommendation is make sure that we hire a coach to help the team out as they get across the iterations and start sprinting. Every software project is unique, but what we've got is a process that you can follow through, the way of working to come up with your software estimation. The process generally follows the same task, but depends on the uniqueness of the actual software project. Okay, the first thing you want to do is basically get yourself access to the legacy system itself or to the sandbox site. Okay, there's so much information that you can get out of that legacy system itself. Throughout that process, what you're going to do is you're going to document as much of that in the library as you possibly can. The next part is to look at whether or not the Codebots are compatible for actually working on the system. And we use a process called the behavior identification. Now, what the behavior identification does is it looks at the backlog of the requirements and the behaviors available in that Codebot, and we say, well, this particular requirement is fully covered by a Codebot. This one here, partially covered. This one here, not covered at all. Let's look at our conversation where we went deeper about it.
Basically, what we ended up with is we ended up with about 30% of the requirements are fully covered by the bots. Another almost 40% partially covered, and 26% of the were just required custom codes, and really good coverage there. And we see that in the time estimations between traditional and Codebots approaches.
The next step is to create a UX map or a UI map, if you like. So basically you get the login to the legacy system, you screenshot as much of the legacy system as you can, and you connect it up using just basically lines or dashes in some description. Now let's go back to the conversation where we talked about it.
It's created a new article in that book, and we just called it UX Pro. She'll finish, she's going to finish this afternoon. Yep. We'll finish it to a point. Now, then the ball's in your court on this one. So what we've done is we've put all the requirements under here based on what's in the behavior identification spreadsheet. And you can see they're all in there. So your next step, right, is to go through each requirement and each user interface and just do that cross-check we were talking about yesterday to make sure that we haven't missed out of anything out of the backlog, or we haven't missed anything out of the user interfaces. This is what we call the UX map, or some people call the screenshot map, and then we're connecting this up. See here where these IDs are? Yep, these IDs here are the ones that that we're using in the requirements backlog.
At this point, once you've got your backlog of requirements and you've got your screen flow or your screen map, what you need to do is just really do your due diligence to make sure that there's nothing hidden inside the user interface or missing out of the backlog. Just make sure the two line up together nicely. If you miss something big in there, your estimations are going to be out. So just make sure you spend a little bit of time doing your due diligence at this stage. If required, the next step should be to create an entity requirements matrix. To do your entity requirements, if you've got a really massive database like 663 tables, it can be quite difficult to work out which tables relate to what requirements. So what you can do is you can list again your backlog of requirements out, and then you list out your tables, and then you can say which tables are related to which requirements. And this helps you isolate part of the database as part of the migration project. Here is an example of how we did it.
The process we do is we go through each one and we just write a little description. This table does this table does this, little description, and then you tick off research once you say it. And then if a table is an old table that you don't need anymore, we just mark it as deprecated over here, so we know it's not part of anything. Now, once we've done that, we jump on the traceability. And then it's exactly the same as the behavior identification. You're just jumping on here and what do I put there? Anything. So I'll put a Z. So that table we're saying relates to that particular requirement. So you go through and you just mark the tables which relate to a particular requirement. Now what that does, right, is we're basically, once we've covered off all of the requirements with all of the tables, we then have the list of tables that we need to consider for the migration part across to the new system. And what it does in the requirements over here, it'll list out, you can see these now are the tables that are associated with that particular requirement, and it does the reverse as well. So for each entity, you can see which requirements it relates to over here. So we're basically just going through and systematically saying which one of these tables relates to which requirements.
The next bit is to actually take the backlog and copy it across into the plan itself. So you end up with the list of requirements onto the Codebots platform. Once you've got it on the platform, then what you do is you can then sort those requirements out into various iterations. So now you're actually starting to plan out a little bit about what milestones you're going to be after and what issues are going to be associated with each of those iterations and milestones. It's possible to migrate your old legacy database across into the entity diagram. To be able to do this, you need an SQL compliant create script. There's some automation tools up on the platform that you can use, but if that won't work, maybe the schema is in a slightly incorrect or older format, just submit a ticket via the platform and my team can take a look at it and migrate those scripts across from you. And what you do is you go from your old schema across to your first entity diagram, so you get a path from the old to the new. Once you've got your entity diagram, then you create your UI diagram. Basically put as many pages and tiles onto this diagram as you need to. For our tech spike for KMS, we looked at some specific pages that we looked at, and we also did a tech spike on this. And then you move across to the security diagram. So you're putting your different user groups and your various pages and entities, and you're locking down the various parts of the system inside the security diagram. Once you have your entity diagram, once you have your UI diagram, and once you have your security diagram, then you're ready for the bots to start writing the code. The next step is to create your time estimation spreadsheet. What we recommend is a way to do this using what is known as the Delphi method, or another way people call it an agile planning poker. So basically you're getting multiple people to do the estimations, and then those estimations there are then used into a series of calculations that come up with the final result. Now let's go back to the conversation where we talked about it.
So David, Bogey did something awesome, and he went ahead and did the estimations prior to using a Codebot. And what did you come in at, Bogey, for the migration? It was like,
yeah, God. Basically from the estimation, this is just previously I thought this is represent the way we're doing the estimation, where we consider all the work that we have done, like the testing, include the coding, and then include another testing, and then the paths and so on. Yeah, and then I know that perhaps for you who basically starting with new technology will think that why created something like this, like take a lot of time, right? But in terms of the current legacy system and then the complexity of the code that we have developed so far, so it takes around this days based on my experience doing the estimation.
When you're filling out the software estimations, you're going to be filling out risk. We use two scales of risk. So you've got how familiar you are and how complex the actual task is going to be. So if something is really unfamiliar and really complex, it hits the highest risk rating. Now, when you're up in that top corner, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to say, you know what, we're really not that sure on what's going on here. So it's carrying a lot of high risk. What you do is you do what's called a tech spike. So the tech spike is a time-boxed period of time whereby you're working on the prototype or the system itself, and you're trying to bring that rest down. So you're looking at either making it more familiar or making it more simple. So you've got to bring that risk down during a tech spike. After the 2 weeks of scoping, we ended up with a lot of output, which is great. Remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get as much knowledge and control back into the system as we can. So we're putting all this information into the library.
Yes, we've been madly documenting what we've been telling you guys.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that the strength of Codebot is not only the bots, but also the process and the knowledge base. That's what I can see at the moment.
Yeah, totally, Afri.
Yeah.
Totally.
The four main things that you're trying to do to come up with an estimation are the entity diagram, the backlog, and the prototype. And then you can come up with the software estimations themselves. Some other artifacts that come along the way, you'll end up with some behavior identification, you'll end up with an entity traceability matrix, you're going to end up with a ton of library articles looking at the legacy system, maybe you're going to be doing some tech spikes, this type of thing, and basically piling as much knowledge and information to bring the risk down for actually working on the estimations themselves. So what is the next steps from here? Let's dive deeper and have a look at it.
Just go to the platform, and then further down, I've got what is the plan from here. Because you'll see in the estimation spreadsheets, it came up with 18 weeks, but I added on another 4 weeks on top of that. Basically, that was for iteration -1 for being 2 to 3 weeks, and iteration 0 for being another week, plus whatever we go for here. Now, what I've recommended here in iteration -1 is basically let's hire an external UX team just to rework the navigation. Okay. Now, concurrently, while we're getting that sorted out by an external team, let's get the internal team trained up on the actual platform. So that'll take about 2 weeks. Now, once they're done, in the third week, what I say is let's get the guys who are now trained to do some tech spikes based on that. So that by the end of that 3 weeks, we should have a team that is comfortable with what they're doing. They should have done some tech spikes based on what the new navigation and UX is going to look like, and we're in a great position to kick off. I think that'd be a really smart way to start the migration project. The next thing we do is we go into iteration 0. So iteration 0 for us is a concept of getting just everything ready to go. We're re-grooming the backlog. That UX and that scoping that we did will change the backlog. And no doubt during that scoping, when they're talking to those end users, it might change the priority of things. So let's really concentrate on getting that emergency registration done, or let's really concentrate on getting those payments done, or whatever it is. It'll come up. What is the most important thing to those end users to get them on board and excited and happy about the system as we can. So in iteration 0, we're re-grooming the backlog, good at getting everything ready, and then getting ready to kick off. Now, iteration 1 kicks off, and that's basically the plan that I was talking about. So the team's off and going, and then they've got their coach and they're ready to go. I've also included an image here of how I like to describe the way the iterations go. So what we're going to do is we're going to be scoping the first 1 or 2 milestones during that iteration -1. And then we kick off with iteration 0, 1, 2, 3, well, however many it is for that first milestone, releasing as we go. Yep, and then a big release here. So milestone 1, good, and we should at that point we should have something in the hands of the end users in production. Then we go back to scoping. So you always got to make sure that you give room for scoping here as part of the process. So like this. So we'll get to the end of the 18 weeks. So we're sort of doing 1 or 2 milestones effectively. And then at the end of that 18 weeks, we'll do another scope, another big scope. We'll learn so much through here, heaps. And then we do a new scope, and then we kick off again.
I hope that makes sense. Let's finish off by having a look at some of the Q&As that were asked throughout our Zoom meetings and as we went through the process.
Just coming back then to migrating the system bit by bit. One of the things we need to do is actually move it from SQL, because at the moment the cost of the SQL licenses is almost as much as the system, right, in our environment, right? So we need to move it to Postgres. So in terms of doing it bit by bit, how difficult would it be if you targeted SQL so you could do it bit by bit? How difficult would it then be to port the SQL database to Postgres?
Yep, and believe it or not, we've actually got a process for doing that. And there's another spreadsheet that we use to help us plan that out. It's called the Entity Requirements Traceability.
What tool are you using to capture this? Because it seems incredibly detailed. I mean, an awful lot of work. So there must be some tool you've used here, right?
No, just screenshot and draw.io, I think. It's a diagramming tool.
Okay, just curious, Eben, on the estimation tool that you have.
Yep.
It's cover everything, right? Not just the development phase. It's also cover everything. I mean, like requirement preparation, design, testing, and everything. Right? I assume that you will have in that tool.
Yes. Yeah. We've got this.
Okay.
We've got this concept. We call it allocations. So you can put allocations towards various activities across the project. So, for example, one of the allocations is called a tech spike. And what we've found from our experience working on these projects is about 10% of the overall project time needs to be put aside for tech spikes. So there's a factor inside that in the actual estimation process. And there's a bunch of these allocations. Like there's an allocation of how much you expect someone to work in a usual week, because what happens if you estimate something's going to take a week, you don't actually work on it a week because you got to go through to all your other meetings, go to your stand-up, all that other type of stuff. So how much of your work week are you actually working on something? So there's a factor around that. There's another factor called trim the tail. So trim the tail is the concept of like a spit and polish. So even after you go through and you do your best to tick something off to the requirements, there's always that bit of spit and polish at the end, because something, maybe an acceptance criteria was weak, or maybe something was missed out or something like that. There's always that spit and polish at the end of it. And we purposely put an allocation factor in for that as well. So we've got all these allocation factors that help give us realistic estimations. And since we've implemented this estimation process across our businesses, we haven't had a project blowout since.
But the estimation, so David actually wants us to do estimation for this one particular module and maybe a little bit to its related parts of the other modules, right? This is the registration.
Yep.
However, KMS is much more bigger than this. So can we, let's say we already produced the estimation for registration, for example, and we can assume that the registration is 10% of the overall system, for example. Can we say that after we produce the estimation, we just multiply by 10, so we got like implementation, the estimation for the whole system, for example? Can we do that or later on, after we got the correct estimation for this one module?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the broad answer is yes, you can do that. But just be mindful if you do that about managing expectations, because talking back to that cone of uncertainty again, because instead of doing that far into the future, you're now doing 10 times further into the future.
Can you come back to the previous sheet?
Backlog?
Backlog. So on the time estimate, is it a time estimate just to develop coding and testing, for example, or it is also include like design and requirement preparation?
So requirement preparation and design will be done as part of scoping, and that's an actual dedicated time that you can decide. You do the scope, and that's what you actually know is going on. Yep. So you don't do requirements, grooming, and scoping and everything prior to going into iterations. So this estimate is, we know what we're doing, and we're ready to go. Yep.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question about Springbok? The reason I said Springbok because we use Spring and we use Java, but I was really thinking that we really want to be able to point it at a low-cost database like Postgres.
Yeah.
But we couldn't do that if we went the C# route, right? Correct?
No, they both bots use the same Postgres database. We don't. None of the bots do any database specific stuff. It's all just standard SQL.
With the current UX or UI design, it will be difficult for our customer to use the system without training. That's what we have at the moment. It's very difficult. They cannot use the system without training. What we want is basically to pimp up a little bit about redesign a little bit. So it will not look much different from that, but it will be like much simpler. We will use it like more of a tabular style, for example, to hide all of the columns or fields that is rarely used, for example. How difficult is it to do in Codebots? Let's say if we want to rearrange the fields and hide it in a tab, for example, how difficult is it to do in Codebots?
It's no more difficult than it'd be for a coder to do it, because the bot written code looks like a developer has written it. If you need to do anything custom, you've got the source code, so therefore you have control to do it. So you never end up being slower than just normal traditional development.
What about the?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. But what about the what is it called, the upgradability of the framework? Because if we do too much custom codes, it might be not compatible with the next release of Codebot, for example.
Yeah. So the only upgrade that you'll be dealing with is like if we go from one version of Spring to the next version of Spring. Yeah. Or to a newer version of Angular. So it's no different to when you want to upgrade those versions. And what we do is we fix you to a bot version. So when you start, you're on that bot version, and we don't upgrade you in the background. You got to request to go to a new version of a bot, and then in the library, we write migration guides. What are they called? Tess? What I search for? Version.
So it's we've got a version notes book. So if you click on C# or Spring Bot versions, and we list every single version note for every release that we have. So if you look at one of those earlier ones, I think they've got release paths on.
Yeah, but I have one question. I mean, I saw that when you on the build button that you say that with the bot later on we'll write down the code. So for example, if we have done a part of the system, for example, and then we already generate we build the using Codebots, and then the bot already generate the code, and then when we add something more in this, will the bot regenerate again the code, or just only some part that we have added?
Yeah, it's a good question, Bo. You said that one is the use of protected regions.
Mm-hmm.
So a protected region, when you look at the source code, looks like this. Yep, it's just basically two code comments. You write your code inside that protected region there.
Okay.
And those protected regions are at the right spots, like where you might want to do an import statement or put another method in or do some custom SQL, whatever it is. Yep. And then the next time the bot writes the code, it'll write everything but won't touch your protected regions. So that's how you get that mix of developer written and bot written code, the use of protected regions.
It certainly looks like it to me. I don't know how you feel, Afri, but it's not dissimilar to the way that Midtrace traditionally used to calculate fixed price projects. But where it exceeds that is Midtrace would only calculate based on for waterfall, and even then, even though it's similar in some ways, this is more detailed. That would be my assessment. Afri, what do you think?
Yeah, in this process with Codebots, I think Codebot tried to make it more details and a little bit long, of course, but it gives like more confident result.
I'll take that one.
Thanks for watching the video. It was a pleasure working with Afri, Bogey, David and the crew. I'm really excited about kicking off the project and working with Matthias and Cassandra and turning this project into a success.